Welcome to The Act of Coaching, the podcast from Ag Leadership. We're a leadership and performance coach training company focused on developing exceptional leadership coaches for modern times. My name is Phil Askew, and each week on this show, I'll be joined by a member of our brilliant alumni, putting a voice to their very own hero's journey story. Our hope is that listening in to real-world stories of everyday people who have chosen coaching as a vocation will serve to demystify things and help you decide if this incredible vocation is something that calls to you too. So with that, let's meet this week's guest. So Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's a real honor to have you coming on and talking about your hero's journey story, as it were, with coaching.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks for having me.
I always kick off these shows with asking you a little bit about your niche or niche. It depends. I know you're from the US, but you're living in the UK now, so you get to choose niche or niche.
Absolutely. And I switch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You might not have it fully formed or fully baked yet, but that's absolutely fine. It's just really getting an indication so that the listeners can actually have a sense of the complete range that coaching can cover. If you had to describe the people that you're in service of at this time and what your niche is, how would you describe that? How would you outline it?
Yeah, I think I am called to help executives, and I try to help them achieve confidence and clarity during big transitions in their lives. So that first big leadership role at work or the next big jump up in their career, I feel very strongly that is my niche. And I think it's because I've been through so many career transitions and life transitions myself. I practiced law for about 12 years. And I first started out as a trial lawyer in public service, and I ended my legal career as a corporate lawyer in private practice. So lots of big transitions in there. I served about 6 years as a U.S. Navy JAG, or a uniformed military attorney. I led teams of sailors in every corner of the U.S. and moved twice to Europe in my life, including now where I live in the U.K. So lots of big transitions in my life and in my career and growth as a leader. So overall, I think my mission is to help people step up confidently, authentically into the next stage of their leadership or career development.
Fantastic. Yeah. And for a bit of transparency, we know each other, so I know what you're working on by way of your coaching and how you're going about formulating it. And it feels like such a great niche, such a needed niche in terms of like the blocks involved in what it is that you offer. I think so many times you come across coaches who hang around in the land of vague, and it's like, yeah, I help people. And you think, okay, so how do you help those people? But when I hear you describe what you do and how you describe how you do it, it really feels like it's got a succinct quality about it. And it's becoming more and more refined as well as time goes on, isn't it? So I can really see how it's beneficial to people.
Yeah, and it didn't start out there. I'll just point that out to folks. It's getting sharper and sharper, but we're constantly progressing with your help, Phil.
I think that's how it goes, isn't it, as well? A niche is like not something set in stone or a tattoo or something permanent. It's something which is evolving and like an upward spiral that includes and integrates what's come before it. I think if we try and think that this is my coaching niche forever, then I think we're painting ourselves into a corner where actually it doesn't do us any favors or the clients any favors.
I think for a lot of my life, I was a very left-brained, rational, logical person. And in the past couple of years, really since the pandemic, I've been exploring this right side of my brain and personality and the creative aspects and emotional stuff that was not discussed as a lawyer or poo-pooed in a certain sense. And the marriage of those two competencies in my coaching practice has really been special.
I'm really curious about that. It's interesting. You mentioned left brain and right brain. So you being in law, and I'm making a big assumption that it's really celebrated that you have the right answers or you come to the right conclusions, of course, in law. So there's a very logical right way, wrong way, it feels, from an outsider's perspective. But I'm wondering how that marries with coaching. How does that come together with coaching, where coaching is predominantly about trusting that the client can source their own answers? Like it feels like you've had to build the muscle in both arms.
Yeah, I think that's right. Great metaphor there. I don't know that lawyers are so focused on the right answer or wrong answer, or there is one right answer or wrong answer. But I do think the impulse to have an answer is very ingrained in me, and to provide advice.
Yeah.
Because when people call you and you're billing a gazillion dollars an hour and you're working for a firm and they say, what is the answer to this? You better have an answer as an attorney. It's just expected, right? And if you ask them a coaching question at that moment, you're not going to get that client for very long. And so in my training at ACT, one of the biggest challenges I had was unlearning that impulse to have an answer.
It feels really interesting that you say sort of an impulse. I think I've mentioned on the show a couple of times before, I know in my own personal journey as training as a coach, because school celebrates having the right answers as well, doesn't it? So from a very early age, we're taught to, if you're first with your hand up, or if you can come with the most eloquent answer the fastest, you're celebrated and you're seen as like success. And so, of course, in coaching, it's not like that at all. It's more, how attentive are you and how much safe space can you create? That is winning in coaching. So it's almost like the inverse of that. Yeah.
It's like the old scoreboard in the outfield I've lived in Boston for a long time, so I'm thinking of Fenway, but like the scoreboard is gone in coaching. There's no way to win. There's no way to lose. There's just being there. And for a lawyer that's used to winning at trial or winning a deal or something like that, it's refreshing, but it's also unnerving to not have that scoreboard. Who's winning? Who's up? Who's down?
Yeah, there is no markers, is there, in that way, apart from the feedback the clients give us and recognizing how they are on that journey of transformation, session to session, and then overall.
Yeah.
What did you make more important than being right when you started to do your coach training? What was it that enabled you to let go of being right?
I think the recognition that the times in my life when I have made a big change, they weren't when someone told me what to do or gave me the answer. They were when I had an insight based on my experience that something had to change. One of the things I would credit ACT with is that they really show you the neuroscience here. Like that concept that you can tell someone, hey, here's how you file your taxes, or you can gently guide them to an insight that causes them to be able to take care of themselves, file the taxes by themselves, whatever it is that their problem is. So I think that's where, once I got to the coach training and saw the neuroscience, I went, oh, that's why barking at my sailors in the middle of an exercise got me a result. But really, what changed the culture? It was a leadership approach to show that I really cared about them, cared personally and deeply about them and their families. That creates change that I don't have to bark about. Once I got in the coaching program and saw that, it was pretty easy to say, okay, there's something here.
Yeah, that's a really nice observation. And it feels so much, maybe the unwritten thing is that the general public don't necessarily grasp around coaching, is that we're doing our best to have our coaching clients recognize that they are autonomous and that they can do this themselves, and not to get hooked on us or hooked on the transformation that comes from the coaching engagements. And I think it's, I don't know about you, but as a coach, when you see that someone's really grasped it and really got an aha about themselves and what they're capable of, it's the most amazing thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just so clear that they don't need you anymore to a certain extent, and that's great.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds like terrible business. But actually, but that's what we're going for. You know, I've heard lots of coaches say this. I know we're doing well when you don't need me anymore. When you go, great, I don't need to sign up for any more coaching sessions. When you're a brilliant coach and you're working with that client, they have the full recognition that they're able to autonomously go off and choose what's right for them. I'm really curious about your transition from what you were doing before into going independent. But maybe before we do that, like, how did you discover coaching as a sort of modality? Was it that you experienced coaching as a client, or you got coaching curious?
My experience as a leader in the military made me interested in this. I was the officer in charge for a criminal defense service office in Rota in the south of Spain. So there's a Spanish Navy base there that the U.S. sort of rents a half of, and there's a lot of sailors that transit through there. I was the lieutenant in charge of this office, and I had some uniform attorneys and uniform paralegals and civilian support staff, and we were responsible for providing all the criminal defense services for sailors in the Western Mediterranean. And when I got on the ground there, all alone, I was the only officer. My boss was in Washington, D.C., thousands of miles and lots of time zones away. And so it was scary just being really responsible for some of these young sailors, 18 to 25 years old, really. By that point, I was in my mid-30s, and I was responsible for them and their families, frankly. But I loved it. I loved building a community of curious leaders, seeing the flicker that we talked about, that flicker of light in their eyes when they learn a new skill, mentoring them. And I didn't know it at the time, but I think that was my first foray into coaching. So when I got out of the Navy in 2020, I went into corporate law, and I really struggled because the work was interesting, but I couldn't use those leadership skills that I developed because in most companies, the legal function is siloed off and nobody really gets it, and it costs money and the CEO doesn't really care about it. So I saw this track and I was like, this isn't exactly what I'm looking for. So after a couple of years in those environments, I just felt like something was missing. So I got some coaching myself, a career transition coach. And over time, we decided that this next step in my career was going to be starting my own business and becoming an executive coach.
Wow. Amazing journey. It's so fascinating how, isn't it? So much of the time, I think if we're open and intrigued and curious about how to be a good leader, it draws us to getting our own coach. And then when we experience it firsthand, we're like, that's what I want to do. Now it's obvious. Maybe not with the intention, but maybe there's a subconscious checking it out, when we step into that space.
Yeah. And I think this is just occurring to me. The identity shift for me has been really liberating. I think I wanted to be a lawyer since I was 15 years old. Always on the debate team and Model UN. And I don't know if you guys have that in the UK, but just constantly credentializing myself to get into law school, and then in law school trying to become the best lawyer. And when I realized the litigation was a little bit sapping of my energy, I know what'll fix it. I'll become a corporate lawyer. I just could not get out of this Paul is a lawyer mindset. And once I did, it was like, oh yeah, I'm an executive coach. Oh, I'm an entrepreneur. And by the way, I also am a person who does CrossFit and likes taking care of houseplants. Like those things all came back too, which had not been present the entire time that I was a lawyer, right? So it's just been really refreshing to be able to rediscover all those facets of my own personality and think about my identity in a different way.
Yeah. It sounds like maybe you were so transfixed with this terminology and this role and adopting it that you were siloing into a place where all those other wonderful things about you and all those things you enjoyed were being cast aside or deprioritized in some way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you experienced coaching yourself through having a coach, and there was then a recognition that, wow, I'm an executive coach myself. And then you started to explore, I would imagine, training and coach training schools. What was that process like? How did you get a sense of, yeah, that's the kind of training I want to get, and that's something that I want to avoid?
Yeah. Even though I had shifted to the identity of being an executive coach and hung out a shingle, the old habits die hard, Phil. So I did a lot of research, like lawyer research on how I should do this. Yeah, exactly. And I think the biggest consideration for me was ICF accreditation and application support. I had a sense, and I continue to have a sense, that as the coaching industry matures, ICF is becoming the gold standard for accreditation. And I think of it, frankly, like the bar exam for lawyers. Maybe, I'm not sure how the UK works, but in the US, state by state, you have to pass the bar exam. And it's a test of endurance, to say the least. But it really is like a credentializing system. And I think I just get the sense that coaching as the industry matures is moving that direction. So I just didn't feel like it was wise to continue to just hang that shingle and call myself a coach like many, frankly, coaches from 7 or 10 or 15 years ago probably would have been comfortable doing. And I felt that especially because I wanted to work in and for those in corporate America. That was the biggest piece for me, was ICF accreditation and having some support with this application for the ICF. The second piece was I was really attracted to ACT and Brown's reputation in the leadership coaching space. And that I feel like I have some insight into, because I've seen a lot of bad leaders and I've seen a lot of good leaders. And I've practiced leadership poorly and well in certain instances. And I just wanted to make sure that when my credential was from a pretty solid grounding in science and evidence-backed stuff. The faculty were either Ivy League instructors or they trained at CTI. That was big for me because just the rational lawyer side of me wanted to have that sort of grounding, at least in my initial coach training.
I think, yeah, it's so important, isn't it? The ICF, for those who don't know, International Coach Federation, courses that are registered with the ICF are held in high regard. And there's certain markers that they have to meet, and there's a standard. Because it's unregulated, coaching as a modality, anyone can show up and just change their business card and say, hey, I'm a coach. I think it sounds so good. Like it sounds like your lawyer superpowers came into the equation in your left brain, and you sought out some good courses. And it was so great you chose ACT as well. When you were actually in the course, and in your cohort, because when we do the training, obviously we're in a group of like up to 25 or so people. What were some sort of highlights or memorable moments that you had in that group?
I was in the middle of switching careers, planning a wedding, moving overseas during my program. I needed and was attracted to and signed up for ACT, frankly, because of that remote option. And the fact that they offered that was really critical for my decision-making process. And I was just frankly floored by the quality of the instruction that they were able to deliver remotely. I interacted with my cohort only on Zoom, but the experience over 3 weekends was truly impactful. I left each of the weekends just buzzing with the connection and so much meaning from the facilitators. They were able to create in this space, even in that distance learning environment. We used a skill called co-creating the relationship, and it just helped everyone kind of level set on, okay, these are our expectations for our cohort, and these are the ways that we're going to use this space and interact. In terms of my experience, I think what has been so fantastic is because we were remote, in order to get the interactions that we wanted to have with each other in the cohort, we had to work for it, right? You have to send the email and say, hey, we were talking about this today. I'd love to check in with you. Would you like to be my accountability buddy? Hey, I'm confused about this. Can we hop on a call? So we really had to work for it. But I just took that as a challenge. And so it really has created, even in a remote environment, this ability to really interact with each other and support each other as we begin our coaching journey.
That's amazing. I think that's one of the only positive takeaways from COVID, isn't it? This awareness that actually we can connect deeply over Zoom or remotely in this fashion. And I think we as coaches were using Skype in the early days and then Zoom moving forwards for a long time. So we had this awareness that intimacy can be created via virtually, like this, via camera and audio. And I think that's the beautiful thing of being in a cohort of people as well, as we call them, all going through the same training, all going through the same sort of personal development. There's that support, isn't there? And the camaraderie of coming together and doing this sometimes heavy lift work together, which can be a bit like, whoa, what's happening? A bit unsettling sometimes, but there's a real solid connection that can happen even virtually, like you say.
Absolutely, yeah.
And just with regards to the training, so you went through the ACT training together in your cohort. And then, of course, once you've finished your coach training, you come out of your cohort. Obviously, it sounds like you're still connected with them, which is fantastic. I'm curious as to how you were met with the coach training that you had when you came back to like your personal life. And so it came back to the people who didn't necessarily know you as Paul the coach. So I'm wondering how that has impacted relationships.
Yeah, Phil, you'll appreciate this one. I am in a international relationship, a cross-cultural relationship with a British person. And I was really struggling at the beginning because I moved here into the UK in the middle of my training. And I talked with some of the instructors about, gosh, Brits suck. They aren't responding to me. I'm not really sure what to make of them. They have a different level of emotional color that they bring to conversations than Americans. And maybe sometimes I'm too hot for them or too much for them. I don't know what. There's all these different things swimming around in my head, some of which are probably self-limiting beliefs, if I'm being honest, about my own abilities as a new coach. But one of the best pieces of advice was like, why don't you start and say to clients, British clients, do you have any assumptions about me as an American? And then that invites them to talk about it. And then I would say, may I share some assumptions that I have about British people and British clients that I've had? And I would talk about a couple of observations that I'd made. And then we would co-create a relationship. And the relationship would be, why don't we agree not to have any assumptions in our relationship about each other based on where we're from? And it's just this lovely moment of acknowledging that the difference exists and creating an awareness and making a different choice about how to proceed. And so back to your question in my personal life, it's also been helpful there too, because I realized that about 50% of the arguments in my relationship were just us coming at things from totally different cultural perspectives. And just acknowledging that has been fantastic. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because sometimes there can be, it can be met with a bit of resistance. It's, you're not the person I fell in love with, or why are you asking me those questions? It sounds out of character. Have you joined a cult? Or it can be scary and unsettling for certain people or certain relationships which depend on a kind of reliability in the way that person's going to show up.
Yeah, and I don't want to be misleading. I don't know that I had that conversation with my partner necessarily. Do you have any assumptions about Brit, that kind of thing? But there was an awareness that just a response that he would have to a certain thing, I would be able to say, I wonder if that's because he's British, not because he's wrong and dumb. I wonder if that's just different. You know what I mean? I had less of a hot reaction to it, I guess I would say, and was able to be curious about it. Yeah.
And that's one of the big muscles to build as well, isn't it, in coaching, is curiosity, like coming from a place of like deep curiosity with what's going on over there with that person, rather than queuing up the next right answer or queuing up a smart answer. There's a deep curiosity for what's emerging in that other person. And that can often positively impact our closest relationships really effectively, really well.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's been a game changer for sure.
Amazing. Cool. And long may it last. I really want to know the assumptions about Brits now, but I won't ask. Maybe that's a private conversation. But actually having awareness of the assumptions that we create in our own head is incredibly powerful as well, isn't it? It's, oh, wow, okay, that's a story I've been telling myself. It ain't necessarily so.
Absolutely. Yeah, frequently isn't.
Yeah, which can sometimes be hard to admit. When we train to be a coach, there is a sense of, okay, so these are these things called assumptions. Let me just park these for a while and see what else is there. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, this has been a fantastic conversation. I suppose I always love to close these out just by asking, so you're on a path now. You've made all these big life decisions. You moved from the States and you're over here, and you pivoted in your career too in certain respects. Projecting down the line, this is a proper coach question. Projecting down the line, like where do you anticipate or see yourself in, let's say, 5 years' time from now?
Yeah, 5 years is a long time, Phil. And
I didn't want to make it easy.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see how this dodge works. But I think I feel such a positive force driving me to make a difference in my clients' lives at this point. And I'm reminded of a saying from the recovery community, one day at a time. And that's been a really powerful statement and intention for me. It helps me to stay present. It helps me to stay focused. And so the next step for me is to lean further into this entrepreneurial journey that I'm on, create greater impact and lasting change for my clients. And 5 years, I'll probably be doing much of the same thing.
Having more impact probably, and more people, and it's amazing how it spreads, the seeds spread, don't they? So referrals and people spreading the good word about the work that's happening in the coaching world. Yeah, fantastic. And lastly, if people want to reach out to you and connect with you, what is the best way of doing that?
I'm on LinkedIn, and I have a booking page on there where people can get on my calendar. At some point, I'll have a website, but I'm telling myself that's not too important right now.
I think LinkedIn is just as good for now, isn't it? And I think that's where people go to hang out and communicate and connect. So it's like the market square. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Great. LinkedIn, if you want to reach out to Paul. Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here, Paul. It's been a really interesting, insightful conversation.
Great. Thanks for having me, Phil.
If you'd like to train to be a professional coach, why don't you check out actleader.com. That's www.actleader.com. On our website, we have a ton of information that can really help you get clarity on the exact right course for you. We also have articles that go into detail about the different aspects of coaching, how to apply it, and why it's a wonderful thing. Look forward to seeing you soon.